recording this for quality control purposes?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead and test it.
Testing.
Good.
Okay. Where's this thing? Oh, hang on. And I'll twist it around. Okay, testing.
All right, it is on.
I've seen jewelry I wanted to donate. How long have I got?
Probably a pretty long time.
Because I keep forgetting to bring.
Lama says that they'll be. Everybody, we're live. Good. So before I start, Ron just asked me a question. Some of you may know that I'm collecting things like if people have donations of jewelry that they would like to have put inside the Buddha statues that we're going to have on our shrine when it's ultimately finished, or things like semi-precious stones, incense, stuff like that. You can get them to me. I'm collecting those things for that project. And if I don't happen to be here on a Sunday when you bring them, just leave them in the office with a little note on them that they're for Eric, and I will definitely get them. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming today. It's good to see you, and I think this is, sharing this stuff is one of my favorite things. So I hope it comes out as well as I hope. But please, as we're going through, if you have any kind of questions, even if there's not a break in the middle of the talk or something like that for questions that come up, please jot them down or remember them, because I try to leave time at the end of the talk for anybody that has any questions. I probably should try to leave more time, because very often that's the best part of the whole thing, is the conversation that comes up. This talk, this particular talk, is the third talk in a series of talks, and the last one in this series. And what occurred to me back in, January, was this idea that samsara and nirvana are the same. And, my mind is like, wait, what? Because let's face it, most of us come to the Dharma because things feel unsatisfactory in one way or another, or maybe downright awful, and we want to figure out a way of transforming that, modifying it, getting out of it, whatever. And then you get this high wisdom saying, hey, it's all the same. And it's like, yeah, that sounds crazy. So I thought, over the course of a few talks, I would try to unpack that. And one of the most basic and I think most profound teachings is that when you enter the Dharma, it's like being a stream enterer. And in this case, for this analogy, we're entering the stream in a little rowboat. It has 2 paddles. And one of the paddles is the accumulation of wisdom, and the other is the accumulation of merit. And by working those 2 paddles, wisdom and merit, we can get across this water that Dharma takes us across. And indeed, all this shore and the water in between all do exist in the same world. But the perspective from one shore or the other shore is completely different. Just like if you were traveling, from one side of the Mississippi, it looks different than from the other side of the Mississippi. Same thing. So the first talk was about the accumulation of wisdom. And I'm not going to go through all of that again because it's on podcast. All these get recorded for quality control purposes. Just saying. So they're available for your review. But we ended up that talk because wisdom, especially the wisdom piece, is really profound. We ended up with a prayer that was kind of created using the words of the Buddha's words, the Sutra on Loving Kindness. And if there's time at the end, we'll use that again as kind of the close of this talk. We'll see how it goes. I get a little loquacious in that sometimes. The second talk was about the accumulation of merit. That's a little bit weird for those of us in the West because we all come from religions in the West that basically have this do good things and you'll be rewarded kind of mentality. And we get confused when we talk about the accumulation of merit. And so that talk was about reframing that so we could understand it. And in that, I used an analogy that came from actually the great Sufi poet, Rumi. This is a warning. This particular talk is very interdenominational, so we'll have to actually, if prejudices come up, then it should be only Buddhist jargon and lingo. You'll just have to recognize them as the kinds of things that have to be let go in order to achieve this wisdom piece. And because there's truth in all of this stuff that helps illuminate the point, because it comes from different angles for a lot of people, it makes it understandable, more fully understandable. So anyway, we used the Sufi Rumi, and he did this analogy, and he said, the truth was a mirror in the hands of God. It fell and broke into pieces. Everybody took a piece from it, and they looked at it, and they thought they had the whole truth. It's a beautiful thing, because that's all about, looking at ourselves in the mirror. It's all about our own particular ego trip, right? And it's like if my ego trip and your ego trip don't agree, then we're in conflict. What the accumulation of merit is diffusing that conflict and putting the pieces of the mirror back together. Whatever skill you can gain, whether it's meditation whether it's freeing, buying a bunch of worms at a bait shop and setting them free in a garden, whatever you can do to put that mirror back together, even in the smallest of ways, that accumulates merit. And conversely, whatever you do that breaks things more apart, that actually burns up oceans of merit. The founder of this center, our teacher, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, used to say, one moment of anger can destroy 10,000 lifetimes of merit. And I think he was being literal about that. And that's where Dharma comes in. That's where our practice comes in. We all get angry. We all get jealous. We all get greedy. We all get lust, unbounded lust for one thing or one person or another. We all forget our own true nature, the selflessness of self, which is ignorance when we forget that. We all have that. And so the path of Dharma, this boat we're rowing across the river with the oars of merit and wisdom, are just a way of continuing to look and look again, getting the bigger view, the bigger picture, that's wisdom. And continually taking the boundaries of our ego and breaking them down by creating connections, stretching ourselves to the point where we actually do, as individuals, reflect reality, okay? So this third talk is something about a practical way of dealing with this, because that's all pretty highfalutin, if you ask me. I mean, I'm not a yogi in a cave where I can shut out all the distractions. I've got a job, I've got a family, I've got all the stuff that you all have. And we need to actually find a way to put this together to bring a union between wisdom and merit in a way that's doable for us. So that's what I'm trying to do with this third talk, is just kind of explore what that might look like in a very mundane way, rather than in a kind of elevated spiritual way. Given that the first thing that we need to do, no matter what, is to recognize that the main problem is we're taking refuge in, most of the time, most of the day, in our own ego trips and stuff. And what we need to do is to shift gears and take refuge in something that's true, and something that's kind and compassionate, and something that really brings life together instead of splits it apart. We say the refuge prayer before we do these kind of talks. So I invite you to say the refuge prayer with me together. The idea is that the Buddha, the historical Buddha, all the Buddhas that have come since, and actually what's in the core of your own heart, will show us the way. Actually, will show us the way to paddle across this great river. The method that we need to use in order to cross it, because it can get kind of rocky out there. Currents are pretty strong. The method is the Dharma. And all the enlightened beings of all time and in the future are pulling for us. And we're pulling for each other. There's nothing any of us can want any more for each other or for ourselves that we have happiness. That's what we really want. And that we be free of suffering. That's what we really want. Well, guess what? All the Buddhas and all the enlightened beings and all the traditions want that for us too, and they're doing everything they can to support our journey. So in this refuge prayer, when we take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, that's what we're doing. We're calling on them. We're acknowledging the journey that we're on. So with that in mind, let's just say it together one time in English. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. Thank you. So, one of the great teachers of our lineage, Kali Rinpoche, used to say, to talk about Dharma is easy, to do it is difficult. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this journey and just the way to understand it that gets past jargon and stuff like that, and to kind of own where we are. In this particular tradition of Buddhism called Vajrayana, or it's the type of Buddhism practiced in Tibet, we have this unique special practice that has to do with what we call visualization, where we actually do guided meditation practices where we visualize ourselves as enlightened beings. Well, visualization itself is a big fancy word, like something special. You could use the word imagination. That's also a little fancy. I had a teacher, one of my great teachers happened to be a rabbi, Reb Zalman Schechter Shalomi. He was quite a guy. And he said that actually what we're doing here in this kind of practice is pretending. And then he helped me out because I think of the word playing pretend as being kind of beneath me. You know, I'm beyond pretending. I'm doing real stuff. He said, no. He said, break it down. Look at that word as pre, in other words, before. Before you're there, tend. And you can think of tend in two different ways, right? Like tending your garden. This is a way of cultivating that which you aspire to be. So we're pretending in the hopes that we grow into our aspirations of actually becoming Buddhas and Bodhisattvas for the benefit of all beings. That's the Bodhisattva aspiration. So this is a very powerful kind of notion that we pretend for a little bit within the confines of our meditation practice that we're Buddhas. It kind of gives us a chance to break down our ego trips and let them, dissolve into the nothingness that they are. And what's left is our actual nature, which is the nature of an enlightened being. That's what the teachings are. The other part of the word tend is to cultivate tendencies. So here's the thing about tendencies. Tendencies, we all have them. Like, I tend to get angry when I watch the news these days for various reasons, which we will not get into here. I have a tendency that way. It's difficult when I see these folks that get me angry to remember that they're sentient beings and that I want to become enlightened for their benefit, that I want to do this work that Kalu Rinpoche is saying is hard. You know, talking about it's easy, actually doing it's hard. So to do it for the benefit of those guys, see? Okay, that's what a tendency is. That's what a karma is. It's a mental habit. It's a habitual way of seeing things that has to do with my preferences, what I like and what I don't like. You know, like for me, I can easily say, I don't like guns. I really don't. I don't like the idea of people having them around where I want to see people safe and so on. On the other hand, I know a guy really well who likes guns. He has guns. That's what he does. My tendency is to fight with him about this point. And in that tendency, I lose the opportunity to find skillful ways of being around him so that he catches maybe some enlightened vibe that could ultimately begin to plant a seed that would bring him to the point of being able to let go of what his preferences and attachments are, because I've let go of my preferences and attachments, you see. As long as I hold on to mine, he's going to hold on to his, because that is what's resonating between the two of us. In the Dharma, what we're doing is we're letting go of all of that, all of it. And in that letting go, we're opening up to our own enlightened nature. And that is so powerful and so impactful that people see that and they feel good around it. And that's kind of the work that we're in here. Now, the old prescription is just to leave and go to a cave and meditate for a few years. Most of us can't do that. So I was looking around and contemplating, what can we do? What can we do? And it didn't take me long to recognize, I've had a daily meditation practice for a long time. I really encourage all of you actually to cultivate a daily meditation practice, even if you're starting very small, 5 minutes a day, whatever. Think of it as mental hygiene, just like you brush your teeth every day. That's dental hygiene. Well, you don't want stinky thinking any more than you want smelly breath. You don't want rotten, predispositions any more than you want decaying teeth, of course. So we do that, and the first practice that we learn is shamatha, which is powerful. We think of it as simple and basic and elementary. It's not. It's really an extraordinary practice, because what we're doing is sitting quietly, watching our mind, and as thoughts arise, rather than following them along and maintaining the narrative, the stories we tell ourselves, based on our prejudices and our tendencies and our karmas. We tell ourselves all the stories about all the things that we think. We just drop all of that and rest our mind. Eventually, you feel some openness where anything can exist. That's very powerful. Most people can't do it because most people don't have a daily practice, and that isn't how our minds are hardwired from birth. We have to train to do that. So we've got shamatha, then we've got refuge, and we recognize, oh, I'm taking refuge in all these predispositions of mine, all these ego trips, and it's leading me 100% of the time, all the time, into trouble. I always eventually get into trouble with my trips. Well, I can drop those and take refuge in something that's dependable and is true. And out of that, we have this second part of the refuge prayer: by the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for all sentient beings. Well, that's the bodhisattva vow. In other words, I'm going to drop worrying about what's in it for me, and I'm going to achieve this thing through generosity and ethics and patience and joyful diligence and mindful awareness and wisdom. Through those things, I'm going to achieve enlightenment. And of course, if you cultivate those things, you will be able to benefit all beings, right? Okay. So that's shamatha, refuge, bodhicitta, built in. Morning practice gets your mind used to thinking in a different way than, this is awful coffee this morning, or this is the best cup of coffee I ever had, which is usually where it's at. It gets you thinking in a different direction. Now, if you add to that this pretending, and usually if you're around Buddhism for long enough, you'll find one bodhisattva or another, or one Buddha or another, or one guru or another that particularly attracts you and resonates you. Any one of them contains them all. You don't have to skip around and learn, 5,000 Buddhas and bodhisattvas and gurus in order to make progress. Actually, you'll make progress just to look and see the one that you resonate most deeply with. And then do a little of this pretend practice. And I'm not going to go through how we do this type of practice this morning. I'm just kind of giving you an idea how this all works together to help train your mind to adjust your attitude. That's all it is. And it changes your attitude for the whole day. It's a way of giving our compulsive and reactive minds a break. Because it's those compulsive thoughts we have and those reactive things in us that actually cause all the waves that make it hard to get across that river in our little rowboat. So these things really help. And I want to say that just knowing them isn't very helpful. It's important to know them, but what's helpful is to practice them. Because our minds aren't used to thinking in this way, acting in this way, being in this way. And so these practices are there to help us get used to the fact that we have the power to be this way. We're just not used to that for the most part. Okay? So, along with this, when we see ourselves as an enlightened being, or at least catch a glimpse of that, and then go about our day, we start to see connections. And those connections mixed with this attitude of having care for your environment and for all sentient beings, mixed together to change some things. It even changes our piety. What do I mean by that? Well, there was this great rabbi, told you the little ecumenical here, in the 18th and 19th century, Rabbi Salanter. This is before the pogroms and the Holocaust and stuff drove all the Jews out of Eastern Europe. And some of these rabbis were like our lamas. They're just very dear people and powerful people. When they prayed for you, something happened, you know. When you were around them, something happened in you. You got inspired. So it was a big thing to invite this rabbi to your town to give teachings, just the same way as we invite lamas here to give teachings. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to host them in your house. And this family was going to host this rabbi, Salanter. And he was known for his holiness and his piety. And they wanted to show off, and they were really proud because they would stay up on the Sabbath on Friday night celebrating and singing and telling stories till like midnight, and just made a big deal about it every Friday night. And when the rabbi heard about this, he said, well, if you're going to do that, I'm not going to stay with you. He said, I'll stay somewhere else. I get to bed at 10 o'clock. That's just the way I do it. And then they said, okay, well, for you, yeah, we'll cut it off at 10 o'clock, because they really wanted him to stay there. And he came to their house, and he stayed at their house. And at the beginning of these particular meals, you always have kind of ritual washing of the hands, purification thing. And he took the most little bit of water, and these kind of wealthy people were a little offended, and they said, listen, you can have all the water you want. We have all the water you need. And he said, I only need a little. And he said, this is before running water. And he said, you know, if I use a lot of water, that just means whoever it is that I don't even see here has to carry more water up from the river so that I can wash my hands. I don't want that. I don't want any more than I need. He was seeing the bigger picture. At the end of the Shabbos dinner, the story goes, he was walking by the kitchen, and the woman in there, who had been preparing everything all day, grabbed him and hugged him unceremoniously. You're not supposed to, just grab these stars when they're walking through. She gave him the biggest hug, and he enjoyed it. And he said, why do I deserve this? And she said, because you got him to stop at 10 o'clock. I get up at 6 in the morning to start preparing this, and when they go to midnight, I get no sleep. And I'm really wiped out. By you getting them to break it off early, you did such a good thing for me. And that's the kind of thing that happens when you have a daily practice. You start seeing things that you never saw before. Even in things that you thought were all good, you were really in a good groove, and everything you're doing is all good. Believe me when I tell you, you're still blind. You're still not seeing it. This rabbi had a daily practice, clearly. And his practice was opening his heart and seeing the big picture. So that's what this thing does. It's not just, it does a lot of things. It's good for our health, it's good for our mind, it's good for our psychology, but it's really, really, really important for our attitude. And it's really, really important for the way that we just naturally see life. And in the openness of our minds, we start to see little ways that we can do a little thing that may be a really big thing for someone else, which, guess what? Is like taking that mirror and putting it back together, which is what accumulating merit is. You see what I mean? So it's one thing to have all the classical instructions about how to practice to accumulate merit, how to do mandala practice to accumulate merit, how to do all that. That's all good. I like all that. I do that stuff. But more important is this thing, is having this attitude. This is how we really accumulate merit. And I can only speak for myself. I'm not at such a level where I just get out of bed and I'm naturally open and bright and perfect, and I'm not an enlightened Buddha yet. So this idea that I have this Dharma to rely on, and the way it's structured, starting with contemplating the four thoughts, doing shamatha, refuge, and bodhicitta, it's step-by-step process of waking those parts of my mind up so I can see this bigger picture a little better, so that I can get a glimpse, probably just a glimpse, of what this enlightened view is, and it changes my day. And that's sort of what I wanted to really talk about in terms of how we get these two wars working in ordinary life. It turns out once we begin to see the sacredness of life, weird things happen. So out of piety, let's say, I accidentally dropped this sacred book on the floor. If I'm a Jewish guy, I'd pick it up, I kiss it. If I'm a Buddhist, I take it up and put it over the top of my head. Regardless, obviously, doing that isn't because I hurt the paper. It's not because the ink on the pages in there is offended in any way. Why do I do this? Well, there are some rules, there's piety to consider, but why is that there? Why, when you come into this room, does it feel different? It's kind of like a meditation hot tub, it's different. It feels different. When you see a rupa, eventually you realize that's not an idol that evokes something in yourself. It's like loaded with blessings, and it vibrates, and because you have those same blessings, maybe dormant, or maybe a seed that needs to be tended, and it's tending it for you in your heart, and it begins to grow. You can feel it. That's what makes this room this room. It's what makes a holy book a holy book. And so out of respect for what's in there, we do things like put the book on our head when we accidentally drop it, or something like that, right? What happens when you gain those habits of seeing that kind of thing in here and you take it out there? And you see somebody who's begging for food on an entrance ramp. Maybe, you've got this little hint of just wanting to say a mantra for them or a prayer for them, rather than trying to look away and being confused because you don't know what to do. What would be really helpful if they give them money, they might go do something stupid with it, like get drunk or whatever, you know. You don't know what the situation is. But if you take the attitude that they have within them, the potential, the seeds for enlightenment also, maybe you can think of something. Something will come to mind that will help you tend that seed the way the Buddha is tending your seed. Same thing. Here's another ecumenical part. If we cultivate this attitude, it grows more and more. And in all the traditions that I'm aware of, when you do that, we begin to see the sacredness of everything and everyone. We really feel like we're at home in the universe, which is actually what we wanted in the first place, right? As we were saying in the beginning, we came to the Dharma because we were a little unsatisfied. We didn't feel quite at home in the universe. When we see that sacredness, what is it? It says in the Bible, for those with eyes to see. We find that we're coming home to ourselves in this very place. That's the way that samsara and nirvana are the same. Okay? And when our hearts open more and more, we start to see things the way Jesus saw things. I like the Jesus example because even though I was raised Jewish in this culture, you know, that's the dominant kind of religious expression. We all know stuff. And he was pretty cool. I mean, I think people who say they're his followers aren't so cool all the time, but he was pretty cool. And he said, whatsoever you do for the least of these, so you do to me. It's a perfect expression of what we're talking about. Then he goes on to say, blessed are the poor, right? Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. This is what he's talking about. He's really seeing this. He really knows that his presence cultivates blessing. And even those that normally we avoid and who we don't want to be like. We don't want to mourn. We don't want to be poor, right? We don't want to be meek. We want to be strong and brave and, you know, all of that. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure of heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of things against you. Rejoice and be glad. You're all familiar with all of that. I mean, it's just Western literature at this point. But think about the spiritual depth for a moment. Just imagine you're the person who says those things as you walk through the day. This is a way of pretending that you're a great bodhisattva because, you know, from my point of view, he was a great bodhisattva of compassion, okay? So, there was a great Sufi mystic Hassan Basari, who was dying, and somebody asked Hassan, "Who was your master?" And he said, "Now it's too late to ask. Time is short. I'm dying." But the inquirer asked, "You can simply say the name. You're still alive. You're still breathing and talking. You can simply tell me the name." It's like, I want to go get what you've got, because whoever that was could see in Hassan that he had the real deal. He is the real deal. He wanted that stuff too. And he said, "It will be difficult because I've had thousands of masters. If I just relate their names, it will take months and years. It's too late. But 3 masters I will certainly tell you about. One was a thief. Once I got lost in the desert, and when I reached the village, it was very late. Half the night was already gone. Shops were closed. Caravanserais were closed. There was not a single human being on the roads. I searched for somebody to inquire of. I found one man who was trying to make a hole in the wall of a house. I asked him where I could stay, and he said, "I'm a thief, and you look like a Sufi mystic to me. Right now, it will be very difficult to find any place to stay, but you can come to my home. You can stay with me if you can stay with a thief." Hassan said, I hesitated a little bit. Then I remembered, if the thief is not afraid of a Sufi, then why should the Sufi be afraid of a thief? In fact, he should be afraid of me. So I said, "Yes, I will come." And I went and I stayed with the thief, and the man was so lovely, so beautiful. I stayed for a month. And each night he would say to me, "Now I'm going to my work. You rest, you pray, you do your work." And when he would come back, I would ask, "Could you get anything?" And he said, "Not tonight, but tomorrow I will try again." And he was never in a state of hopelessness. For 1 month continuously, he came empty-handed, but he was always happy. And he said, "I will try tomorrow. God willing, tomorrow it's going to happen. And you also pray for me. At least you can say to God, help this poor man." And then Hassan said, "When I was meditating for years on end and nothing was happening, and many times the moment came when I was so desperate, so hopeless, that I thought to stop all this nonsense. There is no God, and this prayer is all just madness. All this meditation is false." And suddenly I would remember the thief who would say every night, "God willing, tomorrow it's going to happen." So I tried one more day. If the thief was so hopeful, with such hope and trust, I should try at least one more day. And many times it happened. But the thief and the memory of him helped me to wait one day more. And one day it happened. It did happen. I bowed down. I was thousands of miles away from the thief and his house, but I bowed down in his direction. He was my first master. This gets back to the idea that Kala Rinpoche was saying, to talk about this is easy, but to do it is hard. But keep going, just keep going. It will happen. And my second master was a dog. I was thirsty, and I was going towards the river, and a dog came. He was also thirsty. He looked into the river. He saw another dog there, his own image, and he became afraid. He barked at the other dog, and the other dog barked too. But his thirst was so much that he would hesitate and go back. he would come again and look into the water and find the dog there. But the thirst was so much that suddenly he jumped into the water and the image disappeared. He drank the water, he swam in the water. It was a hot summer, and I was watching. I knew that a message had come to me. One has to jump in spite of all fears. When I was on the verge of jumping into the unknown, the same fear was there. I would go to the very edge, hesitate, and come back, and I would remember the dog. If the dog could manage, why not I? And then one day I jumped into the unknown. I disappeared. And only the unknown was left behind. The dog was my second master. That's a story about the moment where you finally catch a glimpse of emptiness, of self, of wisdom. And the third master was a small child. I entered into a town, and a small child was bringing a candle, a lit candle, hiding it in his hands and going to the mosque to put the candle there. Just joking, I asked the boy, "Have you lit the candle yourself?" And he said, "Yes, sir." And I asked jokingly, "Can you tell me where the light came?" There was a moment when the candle was unlit. Then there was a moment when the candle was lit. Can you show me the source from which the light came? And you have lit it, so you must have seen the light coming from where? The boy laughed, and he blew out the candle, and he said, "Now you have seen the light going. Where has it gone? You tell me." And my ego was shattered, and my whole knowledge was shattered. In that moment, I felt my own stupidity. Since then, I dropped all knowledgeability. Tulku Urgent taught, although we have this enlightened essence, it is like a butter lamp that is not yet lit, not enlightened yet. We need to connect with, touch it to, a lit butter lamp in order to light our own. Imagine two butter lamps together. One is not lit, the other is already enlightened. The one that is yet unlit has to bow to the other in order to get the light. In the same way, we already have the Buddha nature, but we haven't caught on to it yet. We haven't recognized it, trained in it, and attained stability. There is great benefit in connecting with those other lamps because they have already recognized their Buddha nature, trained in it, and obtained stability. Our butter lamp is ready to be kindled, to catch the flame, but it hasn't recognized itself, it hasn't trained, and it hasn't yet attained stability. So the easiest, and I'm all for easy, way of getting lit and one that's available to us all the time is to rely on the words of the Buddha. And so I want to read through this metta prayer. And I'm going to ask you to listen in a certain way. I don't know if any of you were around for the second talk, But I gave a little translation, you know. One of the main practices we do in Vajrayana practice is Chenrezi practice. That one over there. And Chenrezi's a Tibetan translation of the name of Avalokiteshvara, which is the Sanskrit name. None of us know what either one of those things mean. When Avalokiteshvara practice came to Tibet, they called it Chenrezi practice, but that's a Tibetan word. They knew what it meant. So I'm going to tell you in English what it means, is loving eyes. That's it. So when you hear Chenrezi practice, think, I'm going to do loving eyes practice. Boy, nothing simpler than that. So close your eyes for a minute, and then when you open them, try to engender loving eyes. Just love whatever's there right now with you. And while you're holding this gaze, this loving gaze, I'm going to read these words. In order that I may be skilled in discerning what is good, in order that I may understand the path to peace, let me be able, upright and straightforward, of good speech, gentle, confident, and free from pride. Let me be contented, easily satisfied, having few duties, living simply, of controlled senses, prudent, without pride and without clinging to nation, race, or other groups. Let me not do the slightest thing for which the wise might rebuke me. Instead, let me think. May all beings be well and safe. May they be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether moving or standing still, without exception, whether large, great, middling, or small, whether tiny or substantial, whether seen or unseen, whether living near or far, born or unborn, may all beings be happy. Let none deceive or despise another anywhere. Let none wish harm to another in anger or in hate. Just as a mother would guard her child, her only child, with her own life, even so let me cultivate a boundless mind for all beings in the world. Let me cultivate a boundless love for all beings in the world, above, below, and across, unhindered, without fixed views, ill will, or enmity. Let me be pure-hearted and have clarity of vision, free from agitation. Let me be free of torpor, and as far as possible, fix my attention on this recollection, whether standing, walking, seated, or lying down. This, they say, is the divine life right here. So there are a few minutes left. If anybody has any comments or questions, I'm happy to try to respond to whatever you might have to say. It's always hard for them to bubble up when you do a meditation at the end.
Hi, thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Kale.
One thing that came to mind when you talked about pretending was like Padmasambhava and the childlike nature of wisdom. And how that kind of relates to pretending. You kind of equate pretending to be being childlike, but there's some wisdom in that. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, actually, I do. Children, they're great. On the one hand, they're very selfish. So that's not very instructive. Usually that gets ingrained in us, and it's the very thing, our particular selfishness is particularly the thing that we work on in Dharma, and letting go of that. However, the sense of wonder and the sense of possibility and the sense of awe, and most importantly, in my opinion, the sense of curiosity are incredibly important. They're great allies. They're like, we're trying to cross this great and possibly difficult river. All those qualities of a child are allies. They help us row. They help us row stronger. I think particularly curiosity, and the ability to pretend. It's like, what would it be like if I was a Buddha? That's where we could get to. Usually when I was a kid, it was like, what would it be like if I was Superman? So it evolves a little bit, but yeah, it's powerful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Jim.
Well, thanks for your talk, Eric. It's good to have everything back again.
Yeah.
After a long COVID spell. And I guess I've always been pretty, I don't think I changed much from childhood to adulthood as far as the pretend. But I think we all pretend, we all basically believe our own bullshit as far as, our ego.
Yeah.
'Cause, we just changed from, playing cowboys and Indians or whatever to just pretending that you're something that, people will find acceptable. And, it runs hollow at some point, even if, one is very successful, there's all problems that come with that. But a lot of times, I find myself feeling empty, like I don't believe in the Buddha nature. I feel kind of I go from my childhood when I was 10 years old at church, believing, and then it's like, well, maybe that's just a lot of malarkey, and and now, but it's I guess my two main conflicts, sometimes I'll feel just rage. Anger is one thing, but rage is another thing, and also just lack of love. Like, it's hard to, to just feel, love for other people sometimes, but I don't really believe it, I don't feel that way now, oddly enough, because it's, in here, but at some other point in time,
Yeah.
I will go back to that dark place.
Yeah.
And of meaninglessness, where the pretend somehow has to mean something. So.
And that's actually a profound thing. And that last part, that's why we come to the meditation hot tub frequently. We want to soak in this thing that we resonate with, that aligns with who we want to be when we grow up, right?
Yes.
And this just being here helps that. The profound thing about what you said is you actually, with honesty and humility, said what actually is for you. And you can only start from where you actually are if you want to have any success. The thing is that, you know, on the one hand, you said we pretend and make up stories about ourselves. And sometimes we believe our own, as you said, bullshit, right? If we start from there, though, we won't have much success. If we start from who we think we are, because we'll be feeding a place where we're not. However, when we recognize our life as it is in all its imperfection, unsatisfactoriness, brokenness, at least we're starting from where we are. And if we do the practices that are absolutely brilliantly designed, in my opinion. I'm no trained psychologist, but I've been doing the practices for a long time. And I'm kind of a tough nut to crack myself. And they've cracked me. So if we don't give up hope and we keep coming back again and again, like the thief, and keep doing it, I think you'll find that you make a little progress. I mean, in the sense that you already have made progress because you're not, you said, well, I'm not like that right now, I'm here, but that stuff will come back. Okay. I think, I've known you for a long time. I think at the beginning you might have not just those feelings of meaninglessness and rage didn't just wash away because you walked into KTC, but you had a kind of spidey sense that over time, you know, little by little, some of that would wash away. In the all the ancient shamanic cultures in Tibet as well, they talk about the 4 basic energies. And through these practices, we can even imagine that we're cultivating them. They help me. The first one, of course, is the earth energy, which is stability. And, you know, this extraordinary just offering of a place to be, a place, food to eat, air to breathe, everything we need, just, and the stability of it, gravity to hold us, to keep us from flying away, we just take for granted. And all these things like rage and meaninglessness, they're thoughts. They just come and they go, right? As long as we don't tell ourselves the story that they're real, and we start to recognize what is that's even deeper than that is, like the stability of the earth, we start to get a feeling for what's dependable. That's an even, you know, it's kind of like they'll say the energies of a Buddha are the stability of the earth. And then the second one is the humility and the power of water. And you think about the power of water, it's a little like working on these difficult emotions that we have. It's difficult and it takes a long time for them to wear away. But the Buddha Dharma will wear them away, just like the Colorado River created the Grand Canyon. It takes time, and it's gradual. But it's powerful, and it's humble in that it always seeks the lowest level. Then there's the brightness and warmth of light, of sun. That's the third energy. And if you meditate for a while, One of the beautiful things that happens is we get in touch with this warmth in us. And we feel a little brighter because all these afflictive emotions and tensions and stories that we tell ourselves kind of drop. They get washed away. And then the last one is air. And the cool thing about air is you're breathing it, and I'm breathing it, and they're breathing it all over, in China, on the other end of the world, and everywhere else. And the trees are breathing it, doing kind of the opposite of what we're doing to help us, and we're helping them. Air is everywhere, and it supports everything with what we need to stay alive. That's a quality of the Buddha. It's ubiquitous everywhere. Support for livingness everywhere. So when we meditate, we're actually, at one level, kind of letting go of the stories we're telling ourselves that bring on rage, or that say we are rageful, or whatever, or the stories that we tell ourselves that bring on meaninglessness. They're stories. We drop them. And these other things that are really present, and they were here before we, these born humans, got here, and will be here after we become worm food. And when you realize that's what's there, and you align yourself with those energies, it's a powerful replacement for these stories we tell ourselves about underneath it all, I'm really still rageful. Well, only for now. It will pass.
Yeah. The four energies, that's sort of related to like William Blake, the four Zoas.
I'm sorry.
The four energies sort of relates to sort of William Blake and the four Zoas. William Blake has this.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it's just, that's sort of sounds like. Well,
I like Blake a lot, but I'm not sure.
I could talk a lot longer, but I think that's.
Well, we're kind of a little late, so we probably should.
Wrap it up.
We could talk longer later.
Yeah.
How's that? Okay. So let's take a moment and dedicate the merit. And let's just say the dedication prayer in English. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. The courageous Manjushri, who knows everything as it is, Samantabhadra, who knows in the same way, and all the bodhisattvas, that I may follow in their path, I completely dedicate all this virtue. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Soundman.